Support for Focus Black Oklahoma comes from listeners just like you. Keep this podcast funded by giving online at donate.kosu.org.
This month on Focus Black Oklahoma, join us as we learn the concerns of Oklahoma City's Latino community amidst anti-immigrant rhetoric.
Examine harm reduction strategies that mitigate the dangers of drug use.
Listen to an excerpt from a newly released Audible documentary, Tribal Justice: The Struggle for Black Rights on Native Land, reported and written by 2 award-winning Indigenous journalists.
Explore 3 Kenyan-American journeys that redefine home amidst shifting U.S. policies.
And relive Sandra Slade's childhood quest for the perfect Easter dress. All of this and more on Focus Black Oklahoma.
Focus Black Oklahoma is sponsored by the Black Church Traditions and African American Faith Life program at Phillips Seminary, offering a master's degree in social justice online and in person. Learn more at wherefaithleads.com.
This is Focus Black Oklahoma. I'm Kuma Roberts.
And I'm Jacob Littlebear. Fear is rising as politicians nationwide target immigrants with their Trump-inspired rhetoric and policies. KOSU's Lionel Ramos reports Oklahoma's Latino immigrant community has been stirred into a panic.
The quiet churn of an office printer is the sound of one Oklahoma community preparing for the worst. Late last month, hundreds of members of South Oklahoma City's predominantly Latino immigrant community attended a legal clinic hosted by the Oklahoma Latino Legislative Caucus and other community groups.
So we've got 25 stations here with volunteers, mostly college and law students.
That's Senator Michael Brooks. He leads the Latino Caucus and is also an immigration attorney. Those here are planning for their eventual detainment and removal from the United States as President Donald Trump's mass deportation policies roll out across the country.
And what we're doing is we're preparing powers of attorney and standby guardianships for probably about 350 people today.
And that's not including walk-ins. Elena Rios is 40 years old, a local public school janitor, and a single mother of 5. She migrated to the U.S. from Mexico and has been in the country without federal permission for about 6 years.
More than
anything, we faced uncertainty. I lost my husband to violence. So I had a chance to cross the border and I took it. I came here with goals of better schools, better things, a house, lots of animals, for my kids.
She says news of Trump's mass deportation policies, coupled with Oklahoma's politicians' gung-ho approach to facilitating those policies close to home, has stirred panic in her and many other immigrant Oklahomans.
There's just so much going on. First you get stressed out, and then you start to become desperate, because...
She stopped to collect herself, shifting focus to Oklahoma State Superintendent Ryan Walters' commitment to letting Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, into schools to detain students. He had just explained as much to Tulsa's KTUL News.
If President Trump sees fit as there's illegal immigrant population there that needs to have enforcement to remove them from the schools, absolutely, we will work with him to make sure that he's able to carry that out.
Rios says she is overwhelmed by the uncertainty entering her life. It's what she meant to leave behind in Mexico.
You come here from your country for something better for your children, only to find yourself stumped again like this.
She says she knows a handful of people who could take care of her children if she were detained. But if she's deported, she says they will all return to Mexico together. About 90 volunteer law students, notaries, and others stepped up to help Rios and people like her. Among them was Oklahoma City University law student Rafael Dueñas. He walked people through getting power of attorney and standby guardianships in case of their deportation.
It does apply to physical or mental incapacity of a parent. It applies to the arrest or detention of a parent, just anything that hinders a parent from fulfilling their parental obligations.
Parents can designate various parental rights to someone they trust. Some at the clinic made similar arrangements for businesses and other assets. Dueñas says having any kind of plan is better than having no plan at all. Meanwhile, Oklahoma lawmakers have filed bills this session working to prop up a legal and monetary infrastructure to carry out a Trump immigration agenda. House Bill 1932 by Goldsby Republican Jonathan Wilk is formally titled the Donald J. Trump Mass Deportation Revolving Fund. It makes Oklahomans pay for state-level immigration enforcement by injecting tax dollars into a growing pool of money. Statewide, elected officials have also vowed to arrest and deport immigrants in the country unlawfully. Senator Brooks says any ICE operations he's been able to confirm in the city have mostly been targeted arrests of criminals. There is a possibility, however, of collateral detainments when such arrests take place. Rios doesn't feel any safer because of the legal help, she says, but preparing for the worst is the only clear thing to do.
Because I still have to go to work every day, but you never know if or when it will be your turn. Same for my kids. You start to live with nerves, with a certain restlessness, worrying what will happen.
Rios continues to worry, but she still goes to work, takes her children to school, and lives her life. In Oklahoma City, I'm Lionel Ramos.
Translations in this story were voiced by Sierra Pfeifer. To read more about this legal clinic and immigration enforcement in Oklahoma, visit kosu.org.
In Oklahoma, as in many places, addiction carries a heavy stigma, particularly within the Black community. But as Focus Black Oklahoma's Cory reports, the Oklahoma Harm Reduction Alliance is working to change that perception, offering resources and support to reduce the harms associated with drug use.
Harm reduction is exactly what it sounds like, reducing the harm associated with using illicit drugs through a variety of public health interventions. But the concept relies on more than these tools and begins at the most fundamental level with recognizing that all people deserve safety and dignity. Josh Allard, the executive director of the Oklahoma Harm Reduction Alliance, or OKRA, sheds light on exactly what the organization does and why its work is important.
Well, the first thing that we can do is we can distribute naloxone to reverse these overdoses. We don't have anything that will work on meth. That's a different scenario. But with fentanyl and opiates, we're able to reverse those with naloxone. So that's the first step. And then what we also do is we distribute clean needles, we distribute smoking supplies, and we distribute other safe use kits for drug use. And what that does is, for example, with the needles, if you're unhoused and you have limited resources or anything like that, and you need to inject drugs because that's where you're at in your addiction and that's how you survive each day, you're going to be tearing your skin with this needle over and over every day, and that needle gets a little bit more dull every time you use it. And if you don't have access to clean, new needles, you're just going to ravage your body. With the smoking supplies, a lot of folks will be tempted to maybe steal an automotive bulb or something like that and smoke out of that, or foil. And when you smoke off of things like that, you're really damaging your body. You have no idea what you're putting in your lungs at that point. So we want to give them safer options for smoking. Another thing that we do is we install and maintain sharps disposal containers across the metro. And we're actually in the middle of an initiative right now to install several more.
Ellert also spoke about how harm reduction practices not only help keep the person who uses drugs safe, but also the community as a whole.
We want to mitigate the risk for needle sticks for our officers and social workers and, trash men, people like that. So the final piece of how we keep people safe is education.
The rates of substance use among African Americans are similar to those of the general population, although there are some slight differences. Findings from the 2024 National Survey on Drug Use and Health include 6.9% of African Americans have a substance use disorder, compared to a rate of 7.4% among the total population. 3.4% of African Americans have an illicit drug use disorder, compared to a rate of 3% among the total population. In January 2024, illicit drug use among African Americans at 13.7% was more than Caucasians at 12% and Hispanics at 9.7%. However, the morbidity rate numbers for Black men are vastly different. According to the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, fatal drug overdoses have risen sharply in the U.S. since 2015, reaching their highest levels during the pandemic. Black men have been disproportionately harmed by this latest surge due in part to the separate but unequal public health response to the opioid crisis. The CDC also estimates that from 2015 to 2020, the drug overdose death rate for non-Hispanic Black men more than tripled, increasing from 17.3 to 59.6 per 100,000 persons, or 245%, surpassing the high overdose fatality rate of white men, which sits at just over 20 deaths per 100,000 persons. There are other reasons Black men are more severely affected as well, as Ellert explains.
When they interact with healthcare or criminal justice system or any of these institutions, their outcomes are often much poorer than their white counterparts. They're treated differently. They may be ostracized, and then they have the stigma, which is more prevalent in their communities, that makes them less likely to get help. So, and then when they do get that help, like I said, they're treated differently, and it's just not as effective. Some of our staff and volunteers from the BIPOC community, they'll have an incident and find themselves in a hospital, and they're immediately labeled a drug user, and so that changes their care immediately. And I think a lot of times that's based on how they look, not the reality of the situation and what their medical needs are.
Chelsea Louise is an employee and client of Okra and shares her lived experiences.
Kind of had a weird upbringing because back in the 90s, mixed kids weren't really a thing. You were either Black or white or Mexican, and I'm all three, and Native American. My mom is Black with an eighth Creek. I'm mostly Black. So, and I only grew up with her because my dad died when I was 5. He was Portuguese and white. But I have lighter skin, so it was a little confusing for a lot of people. But I had curly hair, so I was considered Black. Still got called bad names, and I was really tall, and I stood out. So I didn't fit in a lot. My mom was very emotionally unattached. After my dad died, she didn't like to talk to me about it. She liked to do her own thing. I pretty much kind of felt like a burden after he passed away. And so I didn't really have anywhere that I belonged until I got a little bit older. I found a group of people who loved music, and they were really sad. They were called Sing Kids, and what came in with that was also a lot of heavy drug use. I didn't find them and fit in with them until I was 18, and I found that I was very, very good at using drugs. The only thing I thought I was ever good at, actually, I thought it was all I was meant to do was use drugs, which thinking about it now is a very odd thing to say, but I felt like that's what I was made for. I found people that I loved who also did drugs, and they became my family, my only family. I moved out at a very young age to live with them and put myself in some really risky situations. My aunt, who was my dad's sister, passed away. I had a close relationship with her because she was the only one who would speak to me about my dead dad. That's all I wanted to know and to feel is to be close with him. But unfortunately, she was a drug user too and started doing meth with me when I was 15 years old. And it brought us together really close together. But she set me off on a really rough path.
Chelsea has experienced intense loss during her time using drugs. She explains her survivor's guilt.
It's so confusing. It started out when my dad died when I was 5. He was 26 years old, and he died of cancer. He got diagnosed with cancer when he was 23 years old. He was told he wouldn't live for more than 6 months. He would never walk or talk again. It took everything from him. He had to get brain surgery. He was bald with a big scar on his head. I remember that. he was a baby. You know, I didn't think I was going to live longer than I was 26 because I thought I would just die at the same age as him. I didn't understand. But I felt that he didn't get to live his life. Why should I get to live mine? I'm going to die young, you know. So that started out with that. And then when I went to California to get sober, I made a really beautiful friend named Alex. And we relapsed one day together. He died the next day and I lived. And then, you know, I got better. I had my daughter and things were getting bad again. I met Jerome and then Jerome passes, you know. I'm like, all these people are dying and then I'm still alive and I still get to live, thinking like, oh, I must have some purpose. But I feel like that's selfish to think that I have a purpose. You know, I had a kid, but anyone can have a child. I'm still struggling with that today, figuring out why I'm still alive and other people aren't.
We spoke about next steps in the harm reduction community and the role of mental health.
I think that's absolutely the next step. For a lot of people who look at harm reduction and are very hesitant, it's because they believe that this is a community of enabling. People are in situations where they are already doing something and we want to take that and make it a little less risky. If we could get in even before, maybe with the youth, we're already talking about working with youth, do more face-to-face community things and figure out what's that stemming from. Maybe we wouldn't even have to get to the point where we have to give them a bag of clean rigs, you know, because no matter what people say, if you want to advocate for people doing drugs, empower them or whatever, people doing drugs a lot of the time, it's not the best thing for someone when it really just comes down to it, because there's so much going on that they're using it as a crutch. Yeah, we've got to get into those communities where it's more prominently like people of color. Because right now, I feel like the parts of the streets we're hitting, like it's mostly white people, because I don't feel like it's as acceptable for Black people to just roam the streets. Unfortunately, cops are going to pick on people who are more dark-skinned. They're not really safe. You know what I mean? That's just a very, very true reality of it.
In 2021, Okra was a pivotal voice in passing House Bill 511. That bill, in essence, made harm reduction work legal. The bill is set to sunset in 2026. Ellert spoke about what he is doing to help ensure that he can continue this work.
I think given the current political landscape, for harm reduction to survive and be as effective as possible, that we really need to focus on what the powers that be want us to focus on, which is prevention. We'll still run our programs, of course, but if we can publicly tackle the prevention side as harm reduction organizations, I think that's going to ensure our success and ensure that we can reach those populations going forward. We're working with Youth Services of Tulsa and OSU Health Sciences to expand our youth outreach. And so those programs, obviously, we can't go to schools and hand out needles. But what we can do is we can go there and educate people about harm reduction and do prevention from the education side.
For Focus Black Oklahoma, I'm Cory Ross in Tulsa.
You're listening to Focus Black Oklahoma.
I'm Allison Herrera, one of the creators of Tribal Justice, the struggle for Black rights on Native land. The full story can be found on Audible. In our last installment, we heard about Mikail-who, a Cherokee Freedman who was arrested by the Okmulgee Police in the fall of 2020. He fought to have his case transferred to tribal court because he's an enrolled citizen of the Cherokee Nation. After all, this was right after the landmark McGirt decision, which returned criminal jurisdiction to tribal nations in Oklahoma when they involved Native people like Michael. But his case was complicated because of his status as a Black man with no blood quantum. His case didn't qualify to be transferred. In this series, we've been exploring how centuries-old laws have impacted people like Michael and his brother Mikail, who was tragically murdered in 2016. His case was transferred out of state court court, even though, like Michael, he's an enrolled Cherokee Freedman. Keep listening to find out why. Chapter 5: Citizenship Fights. Michael's Cherokee Nation citizenship didn't come easy. In 1975, more than a century after the Civil War, the Cherokee Nation rewrote its constitution after the passage of the Indian Self-Determination and Education Act. They decided to redefine citizenship to only include people with so-called blood quantum. They determined that using the Dawes Rolls from the 1880s. Cherokee Freedmen had held citizenship from the 1866 treaty until 1983, when the tribe voted to disenroll them. People whose ancestors were on the Freedmen roll received letters informing them that their citizenship had been canceled. There have been bitter divisions around this disenrollment. Some have made accusations of anti-Blackness in the tribe. Others have maintained that it wasn't about that. It was about the Cherokee Nation's right to set their own rules around citizenship, not what the U.S. told them to do, and exercising what it means to have true sovereignty. Descendants of Cherokee Nation freedmen sued to regain their citizenship. The Cherokee Nation courts ruled against them, all the way up to the tribal Supreme Court. The freedmen appealed the case to the U.S. federal court, and in 2017, they won. Cherokee leadership decided not to appeal. It was a huge moment. Principal Chief Bill John Baker gave an emotional speech.
Yesterday, the Cherokee Nation Supreme Court issued an order reversing an earlier decision. This confirms freedmen descendants have full rights to Cherokee citizenship. We've already begun taking steps to begin the healing of all parties. It has gone on too long. It has inflicted too much pain upon too many people and caused too much division within our communities. Let the healing begin.
Michael's aunt did all the research about their family's genealogy. So when the ruling came down, she was ready.
So I remember her giving out everybody these applications to fill out, right? It was like a family tree where we had to put how we were linked to this person who was actually the tribal member.
As of today, Michael and his family enjoy all the rights other Cherokee citizens have, at least those that are within the tribal nation's control. The right to vote in tribal elections, access to medical care, and assistance if you're a low-income homeowner. But the other 4 tribal nations of the 5 tribes still haven't fully granted their freedmen descendants citizenship. And freedmen descendants of those tribes are organizing to try to win back the rights that those original 1866 treaties say they should have as full tribal citizens.
Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home.
This is one of the most recognizable Christian hymns, Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. It was written by a man named Wallace Willis, a Choctaw freedman living in what was then Indian Territory in the 1800s. Here, Keziah Anderson sings the hymn for other freedmen descendants.
Home.
So I think we can get started. I'm Tirza. I'm a Choctaw and Chickasaw freedman, and I am going to be one of the MCs for today's conference. So the conference is going to begin with some opening remarks from Miss Marilyn Van.
Keziah Anderson and her sister Tirza Anderson are hosting a Descendants of Freedmen of the 5 Tribes conference. Today, the meeting is taking place over Zoom, and there are lots of guests and speakers. One of them is Marilyn Van. She's the president of the Descendants of Freedmen of the 5 Tribes Association and one of the main plaintiffs in the case that won Cherokee Freedmen citizenship in 2017. She regularly talks about the federal government and what she sees as its duty to live up to its treaty obligations, even when, as she puts it, some tribal governments won't.
Our goal is to continue to work to ensure that freedmen rights are enforced in accordance with the treaties, and that public attention is brought to the Freedmen cause.
During this conference, Maryland singled out the Muskogee Nation. The tribe is in the midst of an ongoing legal battle between their citizenship office and two freedmen descendants whose applications for citizenship were denied.
Enforcement of freedmen rights is not a matter of trampling on tribal sovereignty, but a matter of following the law in justice.
Carla Pratt, a professor at the University of Oklahoma, also spoke about the history of freedmen's legal status.
And so my hope is that we'll see the day when all of the former slaveholding tribes are recognizing their freedmen descendants as citizens of the tribe, because the provisions in the treaties grant all of the same rights to the freedmen and their descendants.
Today's conference is a chance for freedmen descendants from different tribes to update each other on the various fights. There have been other pressures put on tribes to admit freedmen descendants. Choctaw Nation Chief Gary Batten said he received a letter from the federal government in 2021 saying they would pull the tribe's funding for a critical housing grant to benefit low-income Choctaws unless they changed their constitution. In response, Chief Batten wrote an open letter to Choctaw citizens saying that he was open to a discussion about freedmen citizenship. I reached out back in 2021 requesting an interview. He only agreed to correspond by email, but told me in writing that the tribe had formed a committee to look into the issue, and that to actually change the Constitution, it would need to be put to a vote for the whole tribe. I followed up with the chief's office in 2024 and was told the situation remains the same. There's been no movement forward. In the meantime, the two Muskogee Nation freedmen descendants who sued are waiting on a decision from the Muskogee Nation Supreme Court to see if they can obtain their citizenship. A ruling in their favor would open the door for other Muskogee freedmen to do the same. But Chuck Hoskin Jr., principal chief of the Cherokee Nation, is taking a different approach. Since his election in 2019, he's leaned into the tribe's inclusion of freedmen descendants. In 2020, he removed a Confederate monument to Stan Wadey, a Cherokee Nation citizen who was a general for the Confederates during the Civil War. In 2021, the Cherokee Nation removed the words "by blood" from its constitution. That allowed for a freedman like Marilyn Vann to run for office, because until then, freedmen descendants had been reinstated as citizens, but still couldn't run for elected office. Today, the Cherokee Nation is petitioning for a change to federal law that it argues has made it hard for freedmen citizens like Michael to benefit from the McGirt decision, like other Cherokees can. Back at the gathering of freedmen descendants, the organizers have invited Cherokee Nation Principal Chief Chuck Hoskin Jr. to come and speak about this.
To give everyone some context, the federal courts look at an Indian in the context of the Major Crimes Act, which is primarily what's been at issue under McGirt and criminal jurisdiction, as having a, quote, quantum of blood.
He affirmed that freedmen descendants are fully citizens of the Cherokee Nation. So why shouldn't they be able to enjoy all the benefits of every Cherokee, including being tried in a tribal or federal court?
The Congress of the United States has been right about that when it's expressed this. Various administrations, including the current president and the Department of Interior, are right when they say that freedmen should be treated equal in the Cherokee Nation. Yet we're talking really about federal case law. It's antiquated. It predates all of the things I just mentioned in terms of the federal government being correct, but it needs to be corrected.
At the end of the Freedmen Conference, organizers vowed to keep fighting.
Thank you to everyone who came, and thank you also, Marilyn, for organizing and chairing the committee.
Well, thank you. It's important for us to get it out there about who the freedmen are, what we're trying to do. All right. Well, we're going to close this down. So thank you very much, folks. Wado, Muddo, Yakoki.
Thanks for joining us on Focus Black Oklahoma.
Would you like to pitch a story to FBO?
Or work with us as a correspondent?
Please email us at contact@focusblackoklahoma.com.
Or call 918-807-3886.
In an era of shifting political landscapes and renewed focus on cultural identity, the stories of 3 Kenyan-American women offer a compelling lens through which to examine the immigrant experience. From the challenges of navigating a new political climate in the U.S. to the surprising benefits of life in Kenya, they share their unique perspectives on culture, connection, and tradition. Zakira Muhammad has details.
According to a June 2015 report from the Migration Policy Institute, there are over 102,000 first and second generation Kenyans that live in the United States, the largest group residing in the state of Texas. According to the Bureau of African Affairs, over 250,000 U.S. citizens visit the country annually. It is the leading source of tourism funds for Kenya since 2023. For many immigrants, the journey to preserve their heritage while embracing a new home is a delicate balance. Today, we explore perspectives on culture, connection, and tradition from 3 Kenyan-American women. We talk to women who made the life-changing decision to relocate from Houston and Dallas, Texas to Nairobi, Kenya with their family and vice versa. They discuss the good, the bad, and the ugly parts of their journeys, the challenges of immigration, but also surprising comforts found amidst the current U.S. political climate. First, we hear the origin migration story of Ruth Jitambi, then Michelle Macharia, who were both parents, wives, and entrepreneurs in Nairobi, Kenya.
My family came to Houston, Texas when I was 6, and I stayed there up until the point I moved to Kenya. And so my husband and my daughter and I moved to Nairobi together. We got here January 9th of this year, 2025.
I was born in Kenya. Then I left right after high school, Dallas-Fort Worth area for work. It was going to 30 years. So I've been pretty much there my whole adult life. So lived in the U.S., got married, had children, and then got married to another Kenyan I met there. We had talked about moving back about 10 years ago, but we weren't ready. We used to come and visit, every couple of years. So he wanted to move back about 10 years, and we talked about it. And we talked about it 5 years later. And then we were like, what, let's just go. Let's just up and go, because we'll never be ready to move. We've been here going to 2 years.
To both Ruth and Michelle's surprise, Kenya turned out to be more kid-friendly and affordable than they had imagined. First, we hear from Ruth, then Michelle.
One example is that we went out to eat. I think we've been here maybe a couple days, and the restaurant had a playground for kids to go to. And so our normal routine as parents of a toddler is one of us will sit down and one of us will go with her and play, and we'll kind of do shifts that way because someone has to be watching the baby at all times, because that's the way we've been as parents in America. That's how it is. But in Kenya, I noticed that we were the only parents, really. I think there's only one other parent that was with their child. And it was almost concerning to me until I looked around and they had attendants that were paid by the restaurant to watch people's children. And they were manning them almost like their mothers. And you didn't have to pay for that service. It was just one of the perks of eating at that restaurant. And I was so floored by that, because I've taken my daughter to restaurants where there's a play area, but I've never seen something where people are taking care of your children for you.
And it's easier if you have kids. Childcare is so much easier here. You can get help from, it doesn't have to be family member. You can hire people to help you, pick them up from school. You can get a driver. It's affordable. You can have house help. That's affordable. They can help you clean, cook, stuff that in the U.S., it's hard to do that unless you are really well off. Like having a driver, having a house manager to help you clean, cook, take care of the kids, waking up in the morning. If you do that in the U.S., you're living the life. But here, it is very affordable and manageable.
Being an immigrant means learning new character-building skills such as resilience and adaptation. As Ruth and Michelle continue to navigate life in Kenya, they share how they are unlearning the hamster wheel culture. Here's more from Ruth.
Obviously, looking at America, we can say that there's potential for corruption and other things in all countries. Going through my own journey of unlearning and healing from a lot of white supremacy that I had internalized gave me the space to think about living here seriously. And I think I'm still going through this process of being used to the grind culture and then coming here and people are just leisurely, not in a rush.
Michelle shared cultural expectations adapted from living in the US and the challenges of building a life in a vastly different system or lack thereof when it comes to healthcare.
America, there's a system there. There's a system people follow, and that's why everything is so straight. Everything is black or white. You go to the county office, 2-3 steps, you're done. You can run 10 errands in one day in Texas, like when I was there. I do so many things and come back home. But here, it takes a little longer, the process does, to get something accomplished, because you kind of have to know how to do it. It reached a point I was almost getting on a plane to go back. I saw like 3 doctors. Everybody had their own diagnosis, medicines that weren't working, until I found one doctor who up till now, if anything's wrong with my kids, I go to him because I guess he's dealt with it more and he's more open to telling you what's going on. But we're questioning because you want to make sure they're being treated what's wrong with them, or they're being given the right medication rather than just being given antibiotics left and right, So healthcare is good. It's not bad. You just need to find the right place.
On the 23rd of February, 2025, President Donald J. Trump announced the closing of the United States Agency for International Development, or USAID. For over 50 years, it served as an aid for humanitarian efforts combating poverty in over 60 countries. Ruth shares her observations on how the lack of aid is impacting Kenya.
My dad was a missionary and he started multiple organizations that help people in Kenya. I am very careful not to fall into American exceptionalism and think, oh, I have a lot of answers that people here don't have, because I have been blown away by how incredibly talented and smart Kenyans are here. The number 3 most generous country on the planet. And so there's just, I think, a lot of people who are currently helping and want to do more. And if I can do something to help galvanize that, especially in these post-US aid times when a lot of the NGOs that were here were getting a lot of aid from US aid and have to think now, how are they going to be sustainable, and looking to the private sector to get a lot of their funding. That's something that really hasn't been done a lot in Kenya. And, I'm hoping that I can bring my expertise to being a fundraiser for over a decade to help in that aspect also, just help nonprofits, NGOs think about what does the next 10, 20 years look like when you might not be able to depend on USA dollars. I think there's a lot to be said about moving to Africa, Kenya in particular, and I highly recommend looking into it.
On the other side of the world, Dr. Caroline Berger, MD, has found comfort in the community in Houston, Texas for over 30 years. She talks about her immigration story and why she chose to remain in the United States.
I actually only lived in Kenya until I was 12. And then my dad worked with the embassy. And so our family moved to Washington, D.C. So I pretty much have been in the States ever since. I do go back periodically, but initially I lived in the D.C. area, went to Penn State, and then did my residency training in Houston, which is how I ended up in Texas. When I first moved here, which would have been in the late 70s, I think life was much harder. There was not as much available for Kenyans back home. Kenya was not as developed as it is now. And actually, my parents would discourage me from going back home whenever I thought about going back home. And then once I finished training as a physician, I actually spent a year at home just to see how it worked out doing charity work. And I was discouraged because there did not seem to be as much available in terms of technology. That has all changed, but that's what led my decision into remaining here is there was not as much available as there is now in Kenya.
Thanks to technology, it is now easier than ever for Kenyans to continue to strengthen community amongst each other and congregate. Dr. Bogwa shares,
we have a very active Kenyan community in Houston, and I think in Dallas is way more Kenyans, so I definitely am part of a Kenyan doctor WhatsApp group, for instance, where people exchange ideas. Both doctors in Kenya, doctors here, they exchange ideas, they exchange job availability information. They even ask each other medical questions back and forth. We have an active church community. There's several Kenyan churches in Houston, and I think that there's also Kenyan groups of different kinds that support each other in different ways. I think we're at an inflection point, and it makes one reflect a lot more. I'm very assimilated into American culture. I certainly appreciate everything the United States has given me and the opportunity. I never forget that, but I also don't want to forget where I come from.
the balance between immigration and retaining that close comfort to certain customs can be complicated. Ruth Uchambi and Michelle Masharia's stories highlight the complexities of immigration, the challenges of redefining home, and the unexpected joys of reconnecting with their roots. Dr. Caroline Berger's journey reminds us that while leaving behind the familiar can be daunting, it can also open doors to new opportunities, deeper cultural connection, and a renewed sense of belonging. For Focus, Black Oklahoma, I'm Zakir Mohammed in Diani Beach, Kenya.
Easter is a holiday steeped in tradition, often marked by new clothes and family gatherings. But for FBO correspondent Sandra Slade, the experience of shopping for the perfect Easter dress with her mother became a cherished memory that captures the spirit and anticipation of childhood.
Easter is just around the corner, and this is the time for frilly dresses, the socks with lace on them, and a brand new hairdo. I remember one of my Easter dresses my mom had gone to Renberg's to buy. Renberg's was this fancy, schmancy place. When you walked in, you were greeted by fragrant perfume, a sweet, mellow piping music, say, Lawrence Welk with a dash of soul. I had been there once before, and that was to buy a super fancy dress because I was lucky enough to be picked to be a flower girl in my aunt's second wedding. My mother said I shouldn't be spending this kind of money. Shoot, I hope this one lasts more than 2 years. I never repeated that to my aunt, although at the end of the third year, we all knew that it wasn't lasting, and my mom said next time we would get a thrift store dress. But here we are in Renberg's. There was a buzz of moms out to seek the perfect Easter dress. Imagine the housewives brunch that decided to go shopping. It was madness in there. All us little girls just far enough not to get in trouble, but close enough in case they needed to do a quick size check. My mom fussed and moved the sales rack around as if she were in a hunt for the last pearl on a necklace that just broke. When she found one that was up to her standards, she proudly displayed it to me and then promptly had me turn around so she could hold it against my shoulders to make sure it would hang just right. For the life of me, I could never understand how that type of measurement was the holy grail of all my clothes shopping. With this white, fluffy dress held up for the other moms to see that she had found, or more aptly, what she had won in the hunt for Easter dresses, we walked to the dressing room. My mom took a napkin, wiped my hands, and told me to stand perfectly still so that I wouldn't get the dress dirty while she wrinkled it on me. After it was on, she stood back to admire it. And only she could, because the mirror was too high for me to see what I looked like. But I know I felt like a fluffy marshmallow. She wrinkled it back off me and carefully put it back on the hanger and told me to get dressed so we could go find shoes. Immediately, When I was done, she went to the sales lady and asked her to hold the dress, as we needed to look for shoes. The way my mom sternly talked to the lady about making sure no one else got the dress, I started to get nervous. Because if it was that precious and I couldn't get it dirty, I immediately thought about the chocolate-covered candy I would get. Were those going to be off limits? When my mom couldn't find any shoes she deemed worthy of the dress, she announced we were going to Trippett's, a fashionable, expensive children's shoe store. My mother promptly paid for the dress and instructed the sales lady to make sure the garment slipper was new and also to make sure the dress was able to breathe. In the back of my mind, I was thinking, who wants a breathing dress? Certainly not me, but I didn't dare say anything. Arriving at Trippett's is like a child's fantasy. They have games you could play and a little forest to play in while your parents shopped. I loved going there, but I also knew that this was a special occasion. I got to play and build a fort while my mom picked one shoe up after another. Finally, she found the right one, a white patent leather Mary Jane with black heels. My mother advised me to take off those funny-looking sneakers and try on these shoes. I was ready to try them on when she let out a huge gasp, jumped up, and told the lady we needed to go to the bathroom. Now, I knew I didn't need to go, but okay. With the bathroom door closed, my mom yelled in a whispery voice why I picked my ugly holy socks to put on. I just stood there looking at my favorite socks and my mom, who was not happy. She said, "Just take them off and give them to me." Then she whisked me back into the store, along the way picking a pair of ruffled socks. I put the socks on and the sales lady instructed me to hold my foot so that she could put the shoes on. A gleeful noise came from my mom and she stood there beaming. I knew it couldn't have been my dusty jean shorts and the t-shirt I had. I looked down at those shoes and was almost blinded because of the way the light hit them. Pulling out her credit card, my mom told the lady to wrap them up. I slid my feet back into my sneakers without socks. Everything was set for a beautiful Easter just 2 weeks away. The week of Easter, on that Friday, my dad decided he was going to smoke bologna and brisket. While Mom was gone shopping, I helped my dad in the kitchen, seasoning the meat and eating chips. He went outside to put the meat in the smoker. I thought, wow, my dad hasn't even seen the shoes I was going to wear, and it was so sunny outside, he would really get a kick out of seeing how shiny they were. I went to my room, stuffed my feet in the shoes with my holy socks, and marched outside. I yelled to my dad, "Surprise!" And when I stepped out, I walked into the grass, which I forgot was wet. After a few steps, I stood there horrified at my shoes. They were now green and white. My dad glanced over and saw I was standing there motionless with tears coming out of my eyes. He rushed over and I told him I was trying to surprise him with my shoes. He picked me up and took me in the house. Of course, he didn't know how to clean patent leather, and neither did I. Just as we started wiping them off, my mom walked in and literally yelled, "Were we crazy?" To which my dad and I just looked at each other. The grass was now smeared into the shoe. Calmly, my mom put the groceries down and went to get a cleaner. I started crying and she said, "No, it's going to be okay." The grass was not coming out though. After a while, my mom just started ironing our outfits in the kitchen. I was in charge of getting the starch. I went to retrieve the starch under the sink and I could smell the smoked meat aroma wafting in. My dad was so proud of the smoke he put on that meat, he took off the foil so that we could see the smoked meat. As he did that, all the smoke came out. We were looking at the meat and inhaling the smell. My mother glanced over and remembered the dresses. She hurriedly tried to move the dresses out of the kitchen, but it was too late. They smelled just like the delicious meat. From the look on my mom's face, I thought, well, Easter was going to be canceled. My mom said nope, she was going to press on. Easter morning was here, and I put on my ruffled white socks and my grass-stained patent leather shoes and waited for my mom to come and wrangle me into my dress. After she made sure my hair was neat, she told me to sit still on the couch and not to move. She and my dad got dressed in coordinating colors, a yellow dress for her and a brown suit with a yellow shirt and yellow speckled tie for him. We got to church and everything was going swell until I felt a trickle of sweat coming down my neck and then another. I looked nervously for my mom, who was walking with the other sisters of the church to the back. Where I was sitting there, my mom could see me looking nervous. She stopped to wipe my face and got a glance at the peach color that had dripped onto my dress. My hair grease was literally melting onto my dress. At this, my mom sat down and seemingly collapsed on the pew. One of the sisters said, "Oh, she done caught the spirit." And I just sat there sweating little peach droplets on my dress while they fanned her with their Martin Luther King Jr. fans and offered her a glass of water. Apparently, someone told my dad about my mother. He rushed in and asked her if she was okay. She slowly looked up at him and saw the barbecue sauce stains on his tie and shirt, looked back over at me with my peach droplets. She grabbed her pocketbook and walked out. The sisters told my dad that the spirit must have gotten her and just give her a moment. My dad and I went outside to find my mom. The spirit, in fact, did not get my mom. It was my aunt, and they were driving off. I could vaguely make out that my mom said we couldn't even be decent in the Lord's house, and I'm going out to brunch. My dad and I just looked at each other and walked to the car. He was muttering, "Well, I guess we're just going to have smoked meat," because he hadn't fixed anything else. I don't make a big deal out of Easter anymore as my kids are older. And from my childhood, I've learned to just roll with what happens. In this economy, this Easter, not sure if we're going to have to color plastic eggs, rocks, or potatoes, but I'm sure we will adjust.
Focus Black Oklahoma is produced in partnership with KOSU Radio and Tri-City Collective. Additional support is provided by the Commemoration Fund and Press Forward. Our theme music is by Moffat Music.
Our associate producers are Smriti Iyengar, Jesse Ulrich, and Naomi Agnew. Our production intern is Alexander Evans.
You can visit us online at kosu.org or focusblackoklahoma.com and on YouTube at Tri-City Collective. You can follow us on Instagram at FocusBlackOK and on Facebook at facebook.com/FocusBlackOK.
You can hear Focus Black Oklahoma on demand at kosu.org, the NPR app, npr.org, or wherever you get your podcasts.
As you go about your morning routine, there are a few things that are a must. You brush your teeth, put on a fresh pair of clothes, maybe even try to eat something before rushing out the door. You are busy. That's why we started the KOSU Daily Podcast, so you can get all the news you need while you're on the go. Subscribe to the KOSU Daily Podcast today.